As this case reaches its most critical stage, the courtroom has grown quieter, not because interest has faded, but because every word already spoken now carries greater weight. What began weeks earlier as a tightly managed legal process has evolved into a detailed examination of behavior, consent, credibility, and accountability. At the center remains Marius Borg Høiby, son of Crown Princess Mette-Marit, standing before the law not as a royal figure, but as a defendant. Judges, lawyers, and alleged victims have all contributed to a record that is now closed, leaving the court to decide what has been proven and what remains unsubstantiated. On February 26, 2026, court deliberations begin. The final day of hearings opened with a brief but serious statement from the presiding judge. She confirmed that all testimony and evidence had been formally entered and that the court would now move into deliberation. Addressing the courtroom, she said, "This court has heard extensive testimony. The responsibility now is to evaluate it carefully, without haste and without external pressure." No arguments were presented on this day. Høiby sat quietly with his legal team, while prosecutors organized their files. The judge reminded the public that no conclusions should be drawn until a verdict is delivered, and that all allegations remain allegations under the law. On February 25, 2026, defense closing arguments, the defense used the entire day to present its closing arguments. Høiby's lead attorney spoke slowly and deliberately, revisiting each charge one by one. He emphasized that the prosecution carried the burden of proof and argued that it had not met that standard. "What you have heard are interpretations of personal relationships," he told the court, "not proof beyond reasonable doubt." The defense highlighted inconsistencies in timelines, differences in witness accounts, and the absence of physical evidence in some allegations. The judge listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, and reminded the courtroom that emotion must not replace evidence. February 24, 2026. Prosecution closing arguments. Prosecutors presented their closing arguments, focusing on what they described as repeated patterns across independent testimonies. One prosecutor stated, "These women did not know each other, yet their experiences align in critical ways." They argued that consent was central to the case and that fear, pressure, and power imbalance played a significant role. Prosecutors also addressed the defense's claims of inconsistency, saying trauma often affects memory. The judge asked several clarifying questions about how the prosecution believed each legal element had been met for each charge. February 23, 2026. Final witnesses and evidence review. The final witnesses were heard on this day, including a court-appointed expert who summarized previously presented digital and communication evidence. Prosecutors asked the expert to confirm authenticity and timelines. The defense cross-examined, questioning context and interpretation. After testimony concluded, the judge formally closed the evidence phase, stating no further materials will be accepted. This marked a turning point as the trial shifted from fact-finding to legal evaluation. February 20, 2026, Judicial Clarification Day. Rather than hearing new witnesses, the judge used this day to revisit earlier testimony. She asked both sides to clarify contradictions in dates, locations, and communication records. At one point, she addressed both legal teams directly, saying, "This court must understand not just what is alleged, but how each piece of evidence fits together." Prosecutors and defense attorneys responded to specific questions, helping the court refine its understanding before closing arguments. February 19, 2026. Character witnesses and personal struggles. This day focused on testimony from character witnesses called by the defense. Friends and acquaintances described Høiby's long-standing struggles with substance misuse, emotional instability, and impulsive behavior. One witness stated, "He often talked about feeling overwhelmed and lost, especially under public scrutiny." Another described attempts at rehabilitation and therapy. Prosecutors acknowledged these struggles, but argued they did not excuse alleged actions. The judge stated clearly, "Context explains behavior, but it does not justify harm." February 18, 2026. Timelines and location evidence. Prosecutors presented detailed timelines using travel records, phone location data, and communication logs. They argued these records supported alleged victim accounts. The defense pointed out gaps and overlaps, suggesting alternative interpretations. The judge asked pointed questions about discrepancies, emphasizing the importance of accuracy when reconstructing events. February 17, 2026. Additional alleged victim testimony. An alleged victim testified about brief but distressing interactions with Høiby. She explained how she knew him socially and described an encounter she said occurred without consent. "I froze," she told the court. The defense questioned the limited duration of contact. The judge responded firmly, stating that harm is not measured by time alone. February 14, 2026. Medical and physical documentation. Medical records were reviewed, with prosecutors arguing they aligned with testimony. The defense suggested alternative explanations and cautioned against drawing firm conclusions. The judge reminded the court that medical evidence is one component and must be assessed alongside testimony and context. February 13, 2026. Alleged threatening communications. Prosecutors presented messages they said were intimidating. One prosecutor explained that the tone and language caused fear. The defense argued the messages reflected emotional distress rather than intent to intimidate. The judge stated that determining intent would be a key factor during deliberations. February 12, 2026. Additional alleged victim testimony. Another alleged victim described knowing Høiby through social events. She said a brief encounter left her feeling powerless. "I didn't know how to react," she said. The defense questioned her delayed reporting. The judge reminded the courtroom that delay does not invalidate testimony. February 11, 2026. Expert psychological testimony. A psychologist testified about trauma responses, including freezing, delayed reporting, and continued contact with someone who caused distress. Prosecutors argued this explained alleged victim behavior. The defense cautioned against over-reliance on generalized psychological models. The judge clarified that expert testimony provides context, not conclusions. February 10, 2026. Detailed breakdown of charges. This day was devoted to explaining the charges in depth. Prosecutors outlined multiple counts of alleged non-consensual acts, alleged coercion, alleged psychological intimidation, and alleged breaches of restraining orders. They explained the legal definitions and what must be proven. The defense responded by denying each charge and emphasizing reasonable doubt. The judge stressed that each charge would be evaluated independently. February 9, 2026. Høiby takes the stand. Høiby testified about his background, public pressure, and struggles with substance use. "I have made mistakes," he said, "but I never forced anyone." Prosecutors questioned similarities across alleged victim accounts. He maintained that misunderstandings and emotional volatility explained the accusations. February 8, 2026. Digital evidence examination.
Technical experts explained how messages and recordings were authenticated. Prosecutors alleged some recordings were made without consent. Høiby denied this in a brief statement. The judge paused proceedings to restore order when emotions rose. February 7, 2026. Restraining order allegations. Prosecutors presented records showing contact after court-ordered restrictions. The defense argued the contact was minimal and unintentional. The judge emphasized the seriousness of any violation, stating that restraining orders exist to prevent escalation. February 6, 2026. Second alleged victim testimony. An alleged victim described knowing Høiby socially and experiencing an encounter she said lacked consent. The defense questioned inconsistencies. The judge reminded the court that memory gaps are common in stressful situations. February 5, 2026. Continued testimony and messages. Messages sent by an alleged victim to friends were reviewed. Prosecutors said they showed fear and distress. The defense argued they reflected relationship conflict. The judge allowed both interpretations to remain on record. February 4, 2026. First alleged victim testimony. The first alleged victim described a relationship that became controlling. "I did not agree and I was scared," she told the court. The defense questioned continued contact. The judge intervened, stating that contact does not equal consent. February 3, 2026. Opening statements. Prosecutors described a pattern of behavior involving pressure and lack of consent. The defense argued the case involved misunderstood relationships. The judge reminded everyone that opening statements were not evidence. On February 2, 2026, the court focused on how testimony would be handled. Prosecutors asked that some alleged victims be allowed to testify behind screens. One prosecutor said, "These individuals are afraid, and the court has a duty to minimize further harm." The defense objected, arguing that full visibility was part of a fair trial. The judge ruled that screens would be allowed during certain testimonies, but stressed that transcripts would remain part of the public record. She told both sides, "Fairness applies to everyone in this room." February 1, 2026, the judge opened the proceedings by setting the tone. She stated plainly that this case would be decided only on evidence presented in court and that the courtroom was not a place for assumptions. Prosecutors then summarized the allegations, telling the court that Høiby faced multiple counts related to alleged non-consensual acts, alleged coercive behavior, and alleged violations of restraining orders. They argued that several alleged victims had expressed fear and requested protection. Høiby's lawyer responded by saying his client denied all allegations of non-consensual conduct and had cooperated fully with authorities. After hearing both sides, the judge ruled that Høiby would remain in custody during the trial, explaining that the decision was based on risk assessment and safety concerns, not guilt. The case now awaits a verdict in Norway, where the outcome will depend solely on what the court determines has been proven. Thank you for watching. The legal situation involving Marius Borg Høiby, son of Crown Princess Mette-Marit, continues to draw widespread attention in Norway and beyond. We invite you to share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Do you believe the court is handling this case appropriately? If you found this update helpful, like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you stay informed as new developments emerge.